Tonight, from New Orleans, an especially powerful and dangerous hurricane is headed to strike the Gulf Coast in a matter of hours. As Lili closes in, residents are boarding up and heading out. A massive evacuation is underway tonight. Could we see the worst-case scenario? Why New Orleans is just about the worst place a hurricane can hit.
This is the CBS Evening News, with Dan Rather reporting tonight from New Orleans.
Good evening from the hurricane strike zone. A super strong, possibly historic hurricane is about to strike here along the Gulf Coast. Hurricane Lili is now officially an especially dangerous Category 4 hurricane. That means sustained winds of 140 miles per hour, gusts much higher than that, and with an unusually large sea surge. It could get even stronger before landfall tomorrow, which is now considered to be most likely in western Louisiana, but possibly in Texas, in the Galveston-Houston area or just above that. This much is sure: wherever this hurricane hits, the coastal storm surge could bring floods miles inland and plenty of rising water and rain. This was getaway day along the Gulf coasts of Texas and Louisiana. More than 750,000 residents were advised, in some cases ordered, to leave, get to higher ground. In Morgan City, Louisiana, the hurricane flag went up. The flood wall was shut tight. No one now is underestimating the threat to life and property from Hurricane Lili, now heading straight through the Gulf. And it is only getting stronger as it moves toward shore. After landfall sometime tomorrow, expected somewhere on the Louisiana-Texas coast, the hurricane's path of destruction is expected to persist well inland, curving at least slightly east, with severe weather all the way to Ohio by Saturday. Tonight, hurricane warnings are up from High Island, Texas, to the mouth of the Mississippi River. That means full hurricane force conditions, very high wind, very high surf, and very heavy rain are expected in the official hurricane warning area within 24 hours. Now, CBS News has correspondents deployed tonight here in New Orleans and all along the Gulf Coast to bring you full coverage of this threatening storm. We begin with Cynthia Bowers in the low country just south of New Iberia, Louisiana. Cynthia?
Dan, Hurricane Lili is already making her presence felt here. This afternoon, we were belted by a band of driving wind and rain, and it looks like it's starting again. Here in the path of a hurricane many now call a monster, the talk isn't of riding this one out, it's of running away.
Go visit family in Houston or Nashville or somewhere, but get the hell out of here.
And from Port Arthur, Texas to the mouth of the Mississippi, that's exactly what as many as 700,000 people are doing. Packing up what's near and dear, gassing up and getting out.
No, don't wait till the last minute. Get out of here as fast as possible. Storm, we don't want to be around none of that.
It seems no one does. Even the few who hoped against hope Lili wouldn't live up to all the hype are now racing the clock, buying plywood, and trying to nail it into place, board up, and then bail out.
I had a feeling the last one wasn't going to be bad, but this one I think we're going to get it, you know.
Some people already are. Louisiana shrimpers hurting from low prices have had to bring their boats in for the second time in as many weeks. First Isidore, now Lili is holding their profits ransom.
We have to accept the weather, we have to accept the condition we have.
Joe Martinez is in the same boat, joining hundreds of thousands who can only hope what they left behind can withstand the water and the wind.
Andrew is fresh in our minds, so we know what can happen.
Many Gulf Coast residents can reel off the names of major hurricanes as easily as they can rattle off the names of their own kids. Andrew, Audrey, Betsy, Camille. Now it seems likely Lili will be added to that list. Dan?
Cynthia Bowers reporting live from just south of New Iberia, Louisiana. When there's a hurricane on the way, we always like to check in with one of the world's leading hurricane experts, our old friend Dr. Neil Frank of CBS Houston affiliate KHOU-TV. A short time ago, I asked Dr. Frank where he expects this hurricane to hit and how bad a hit it might be.
Well, I think that there is a chance that the strengthening that we've observed now for the last 18 hours may level off. We certainly hope so. But if it's a Category 4 storm as it makes landfall, we're going to see tides maybe up to 20 feet on the Louisiana coast.
Do you think it comes in west of New Orleans?
We anticipate that there will be a gradual turn to the right, and if it does that, it looks like somewhere in the western part of Louisiana will be the landfall point. But we've seen no indication of that turn yet, and if it continues to move straight on a straight line like it is right now, then we can't rule out the possibility of a landfall in the Galveston-Houston area.
Dr. Frank, there's been a lot of talk in this part of the country of comparing this hurricane with Hurricane Audrey.
Well, Hurricane Audrey was a Category 4 hurricane, just like this one in 1957, and it moved over the western part of Louisiana and trapped folks in Cameron, Louisiana, and some 500 people died.
And how big will the initial wave from the storm surge be in height, and how far inland is it likely to go?
Well, when we talk about a storm surge, we're talking about a dome of water that might be as much as 20 feet high. Superimposed on top of that, you have 10-foot waves. The water could move in maybe 15 miles.
One of the places that this hurricane storm surge could hit first and worst is Grand Isle, Louisiana. CBS's Bob McNamara reports on the fear of high water there.
It was only a week ago that Tropical Storm Isidore turned Grand Isle into a ghost town. And today, Mark Fraser and his family were packing up their pets and taking no chances with Lili either.
Hopefully, we got our fingers crossed on this one.
Yeah.
But if it turns and comes up here, there won't be nothing to come back to. Very little anyway.
The Frasers were under orders to leave.
But we can't take another one. The island can't take one right now. You know, it just can't. It's beat up.
Grand Isle is Louisiana's land's end, so they're used to storms. But today here, all along the Louisiana and southeast Texas coast, as Lili intensifies, so do the fears that she could be more lethal than any hurricane in years.
This is an animal. It's a powerful animal coming, and it's Mother Nature. And if it's going to be a Category 3 or better, being honest with you guys, it can really, really wipe out this island.
Recalling how Hurricane Betsy devastated Grand Isle nearly 4 decades ago, construction crews worked all night shoring up a levee to protect the town from an expected storm surge.
It's coming. It's coming. We're going to get something. We just don't know how much.
Kerry Ward and Sam Jackson rushed to finish boarding up their house on stilts.
I'm expecting not to come to nothing. Come back here to poles standing. Just 126-mile-an-hour wind. It's going to wipe out most everything in its way.
People who live here call it paradise, and tonight they pray it still is in a day or two. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Grand Isle, Louisiana.
Stay with CBS News and this CBS station for the latest on the hurricane. You can get up-to-the-minute information anytime, all the time at cbsnews.com. Later in this broadcast, a look at the worst-case perfect storm hurricane scenario. Why a direct hit on New Orleans would be so devastating. There's other important news tonight in the U.S. showdown with Saddam Hussein. President Bush got some of what he wants today. Leaders of the U.S. House agreed on the language of a resolution authorizing war with Iraq. CBS's John Roberts reports now that the president is far less happy with what he's getting at the United Nations. John?
Dan, administration sources tell CBS News tonight that negotiations to craft a tough new UN resolution against Iraq have reached a stalemate, and that President Bush is getting close to the end of his patience with the lack of progress.
2 weeks into the UN negotiations, with nothing to show for it, the White House is said to be deeply frustrated. France has been singled out as the roadblock to the president's proposal for a single resolution demanding Saddam disarm or face the consequences. And sources say there is no reason to have hope France will come around. The process has less than 2 weeks left, sources say, before the White House's patience runs out.
Saddam must disarm. Period.
The pronouncements are intended to put maximum pressure on Security Council members while at the same time preparing the American people for the real chance that the UN process could fail. President Bush was given new backing for that possibility today when House leaders reached agreement on congressional authorization to go to war with or without the UN. In a Rose Garden pep rally with House members, Mr. Bush also brought in a few like-minded senators, Republican and Democrat, and made it clear today time is running out for Saddam.
If he persists in his defiance, the use of force may become unavoidable.
The Rose Garden event was an attempt to circumvent the Senate's Democratic leader, who is insisting that the president give him more compromises before he signs on to a resolution. What's not clear at this point is the White House seeking unanimity in the Senate or simply enough votes to get the measure passed. Dan?
Live from the White House, John Roberts. The alleged shoe bomber Richard Reed has decided to plead guilty to all charges against him. Reed, a British citizen, is accused of trying to set off explosives hidden in his shoes on an American Airlines flight from Paris to Miami last year. He was due to go on trial in Boston in November. His lawyer says Reed wants to avoid the pain a trial could cause his family. A U.S. Army sergeant was one of 3 people killed today by a terrorist bomb in the southern Philippines. It happened in Zamboanga, where U.S. troops are supporting the Philippine Army's anti-terror campaign. The bomb, hidden on a motorcycle, ripped through a crowd outside a restaurant. 24 people were injured, including at least 1 American serviceman. Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, the feds bust a top Enron executive charged with a vast corporate crime. Democrats have won the latest round in the battle for control of the United States Senate. In New Jersey today, that state's Supreme Court ruled the Democrats may put a new Senate candidate on the November ballot to replace the resigned incumbent Bob Torricelli. That is, he says that he won't run. He didn't actually resign. He withdrew on Monday. The replacement is to be former Senator Frank Lautenberg. The Republicans are expected to appeal, trying to keep Lautenberg off the ballot. A major bust occurred today in the U.S. government's investigation of corporate corruption. The man alleged to be the executive chef in the Enron book cooking operation was charged today with defrauding the company and investors. CBS's Anthony Mason has that story.
It was Andy Fastow's turn to wear the handcuffs today. Enron's former chief financial officer was charged with setting up the off-the-balance sheet partnerships that hid Enron's debt, deceived investors, made him millions, and ultimately led to the company's collapse.
Fastow systematically and thoroughly corrupted the business of one of the largest corporations in the world.
Fastow had to post $5 million in bail, $3 million in cash.
We took deeds to the home he lives in, to the home his parents live in, and the home that he is currently building.
Fastow is the most senior executive to be charged in the Enron case, but the government may be aiming higher still.
Investigators and prosecutors are expecting Andy Fastow to provide help concerning Jeffrey Skilling. So he's the next target.
I believe the company was in strong financial condition.
Jeffrey Skilling, Enron's former CEO, told Congress he knew nothing. Maybe not, says Brian Kruver, author of Anatomy of Greed.
If there's anything that he knew the financial condition of the company. He cared about the stock price more than anything.
But Fastow isn't fingering anyone, at least not yet.
If your question is Mr. Fastow cooperating with law enforcement, the answer is no.
But the feds also moved to seize $11 million in Fastow's assets today, and the government is hoping the prospect of a long prison term may soon change Mr. Fastow's tune. Dan?
Anthony Mason live in New York, thanks. It could soon get a lot hotter for Martha Stewart. An assistant to her stockbroker pleaded guilty today to a misdemeanor, part of a plea deal in which Douglas Faneuil may testify against Stewart in the government's investigation of possible insider trading in M-Clone stock. Martha Stewart has not so far been charged with anything. Coming up on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America. They're little and blue and phony and maybe dangerous. Counterfeit Viagra. Speak of the government fight against drug smuggling, and you probably mean the traffic in illicit substances like cocaine or heroin. But there's also a large and growing problem with what appear to be prescription medications. Appear to be, but they're not. CBS's Cheryl Atkinson looked into this for tonight's Eye on America.
You know, the pills right in there.
Smuggled inside speakers and teddy bears, it looks just like the real thing.
Says Pfizer on it.
Yeah, it's good counterfeiting. And then
It's actually a bogus version of Viagra. The popular impotence pill is now the most widely counterfeited drug in the world, worth as much to the crooks as illegal narcotics.
A lot of people, when they hear about counterfeit Viagra, they kind of chuckle.
Yeah,
Why is this a serious issue?
it could be a real health hazard.
A hazard because of all the unknowns. Counterfeit drugs can have too much medicine, not enough, the wrong kind, or can be contaminated. Snagged in the bus were David Rayner of Denver and an import-export broker in Las Vegas. Both operated out of their homes. In all, 7 people and 5 companies are charged with making and selling the lookalikes over the internet. The suppliers bragged they could import 2.5 million tablets a month.
And it's not just Viagra. In the past few years, the FDA has opened 55 counterfeit drug investigations, but admits it can't even begin to scratch the surface of a problem so huge.
Philip Manuel is a counterfeit drug super sleuth who's been sniffing out bogus drugs for 2 decades.
Most of the counterfeit comes from outside the United States in places where it's easy to manufacture.
Alarmed by the ease with which counterfeit profiteers are smuggling drugs into the country, he's begun focusing on a new worry, a motive more nefarious than profits.
If it's counterfeit designed specifically to harm people and cause an outbreak of disease, then you have a real serious problem on your hands.
Are you implying a terrorist organization might actually poison medicine and send it into the United States?
I think that's a definite possibility.
There's no evidence of any terrorist connection to counterfeit drugs, but U.S. pharmaceutical companies know what a disaster that would be and are hiring detectives like Manuel on their own to try to get an edge. In the case of the fake Viagra, most of the suspects and companies are untouchable, out of reach in China and India, and U.S. investigators are left with the reality.
We think some of those drugs, we're pretty sure, are now in local pharmacies, and we're going to prosecute those pharmacies because we think that they knew that they were buying counterfeit drugs.
With no idea where the next fake pill will turn up, investigators only know they haven't seen the last. In New York, I'm Cheryl Atkinson for Eye on America.
Next here on the CBS Evening News from New Orleans. It's a beautiful city and just about the worst place in the United States for a major hurricane to hit. Updating tonight's top story in tomorrow's headlines. Full Category 4 Hurricane Lili, now with a 140-mile-an-hour winds sustained, is expected to make landfall sometime tomorrow, probably on the west or central Louisiana coast, possibly in the Galveston-Houston area of Texas or just north of that. As the hurricane approaches land, a powerful sea surge could bring flooding miles inland, and this hurricane will keep on going, plowing north and east, possibly in one form or another, all the way up to the Canadian border. As for the danger here in New Orleans, the hope is this hurricane will not make a last-minute lurch to the right as it nears land, because if it does make that sharp right, it could be roughly the equivalent here of an earthquake hitting San Francisco. Even in a tropical storm of moderate intensity like Isidore last week, much of New Orleans is underwater. What's the worst perfect storm scenario for New Orleans?
Well, the problem is the city itself was originally called Ile de Orleans, which is the island of Orleans, because it is surrounded essentially by water.
Hurricane scientist Joe Saheda says that this city, surrounded by the mighty Mississippi, would be virtually impossible to protect if hit square on by a major hurricane. A Category 4 or 5 that hits New Orleans in exactly the wrong way has the potential to kill how many people in your estimation?
Well, I've heard numbers anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000. So we're talking about an enormous tragedy for the state and the country.
That's because the sea surge, the real killer in most hurricanes, could be as much as 50 miles wide and 25 feet high, pushing nearby Lake Pontchartrain over its levees into a city of 1.4 million people that sits 8 feet below sea level, what some people here call the bowl.
1,200,000 people have to get out of the bowl, and so we've got to get everybody out of here. Those who don't leave are probably going to lose their lives.
If disaster does hit this city, Walter Maestri will be responsible for getting more than 1 million people to safety over a limited road network that could be crowded bumper to bumper with evacuees and flood in a heartbeat.
It's catastrophic. We could lose the entire city, and that's what we talk about when we talk about the direct hit of a Cat 5 storm.
This is the extent of the flooding that would occur here for a Category 5 storm.
Joe Saheda showed me just how high the water would go here in the historic French Quarter.
The water would be from here all the way up there?
That's correct.
Well, CBS News will be tracking the hurricane in the hours ahead. We'll be reporting again tomorrow from the hurricane strike zone. Later this evening on 60 Minutes 2, is anyone to blame for not preventing 9/11? Two former White House staffers say yes, and tonight they say who. Plus, we've met some tough mobsters before, but not like her. She'd make Tony Soprano nervous, and for good reason. Plus, think you've seen the Rolling Stones? Not like this. Ed Bradley goes behind the scenes on tour. 60 Minutes 2, coming up quickly tonight at 8, 7 Central. Now for the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting tonight from New Orleans and the hurricane strike zone. I'll see you soon on 62.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com. AOL keyword CBS News.